Well, hello, folks. This is Between Two Sundays, the show where we dissect the readings from the lectionary for the week to come and talk about how we've lived out of the readings from the lectionary from the week we just had. My co-host, Mark Beresford, is sitting right here beside me if you're watching on YouTube, although he's 900 kilometers away. And if you're listening on Spotify or one of our other podcast areas, you wouldn't have a clue because you can't see. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Partly because my co-host is sitting exactly the same distance from me, but we get to have this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I've already explained what we do in the show. So we always kick off by talking about last week's readings and what they were about and how we've lived out of them. And then we jump into the readings to come. So from last weekend, mate, what have you been dwelling on and stirring and sitting with and abiding alongside of?
Yeah. So I've been sitting with this Joel reading and that wonderfully memorable phrase, I will repay you for the years that the swarming locust has eaten. Partly because, a couple of years ago, I suppose, this was sort of a passage given to me by someone who thought this was significant for me and my family. And I've sort of sat with the temptation to read this in very materialistic ways, and wondered how many other dimensions you could read this passage from: spiritual, physical, emotional. There would be so many angles you could sort of ponder this from. And I've sort of been asking myself, intellectual. You could sort of, there's always aspects of humanity that get taken away from us as we go through a world that's not always as loving as the world we were created to be in. I've just thought God could fulfill this promise in 1,000 different ways. And just been sitting with that, wondering what the ways are I would like God to fulfill that, and wondering what the ways are that God is actually fulfilling that in my life and my family's life.
Yeah.
So I've sort of been sitting with that. What is what does our culture tell us that might look like, and what are the other possibilities? What are the broader possibilities?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kicked off chewing around the Joel reading as well. And just to give you an idea of where my brain went to get to what I got to, obviously thought about that in the context of Acts and where, there's this, Peter uses that text on the day of Pentecost.
Yes.
And I got to thinking, well, what is it supposed to look like when the Spirit is poured out upon us? Is it meant to look like, as we're often told by some sectors of the Christian church, spiritual gifts?
Yes.
Is it supposed to look like stunning preaching? Is it supposed to look like being able to do acts of miracles or something? Or does it look like what we saw in all of the readings from last week? Did it look like hope and restoration? Does it look like endurance? Does it look like being made just and being, encouraged and provoked to pursue justice? Is that what being filled with the Spirit looks like? And started to, well, not for the first time, but was reminded, I suppose, that it's actually got not much at all to do with what the indwelling of the Spirit makes us do per se. It's about how the indwelling of the Spirit makes us live, and how we live out of that. That is what it looks like when God's Spirit is poured out upon us. And of course, being reminded that God's Spirit lives within all of us anyway, it's just awakening to it.
And isn't
awakening
that
to what
kind
that
of,
is.
isn't that just more interesting?
Way more.
The Spirit of God comes into my life and I can do all these clever things. Or the Spirit of God comes in my life and I live to the fullest. That is, I just find that more intriguing and much more difficult to pin down, actually.
Well, this is why a lot of people avoid it.
Well, yes.
And
I think often gifts are kind of at least, often we choose the measurable ones. I don't think we choose them all, but we choose the measurable ones to, this is the evidence that makes it certain that the Spirit of God is in me. I just don't find that as interesting.
And it's not even in fact, Scripture,
I don't think
Paul wrote himself in Galatians chapter 5, the fruit of the Spirit isn't speaking in tongues and healing someone over there. It's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control.
Well, why would you want to settle for that as evidence if you were trying to prove? Because that's so hard to measure.
Yeah, how do you nail down peace?
That's right.
And how do you identify it? How do you see it? So it's probably worth throwing in here that I have a theory, and I think you share it just from what you said, that there are a lot of people within Christianity who really don't like mystery and will do everything they can to avoid it, to the point where they will convince themselves of something within their own theology to avoid it. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that we can know nothing of God, but to suggest that we can know everything of God, I think falls far short of. It was I think St. Augustine, wasn't it? If God can be explained, then it's not God.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
That's pretty much out there. Yeah. Right. Well,
we've got to we've been exploring the universe for as long as people have been around. No one is claiming on any level that we've got anywhere near the edge of it or comprehending it. And this is, according to our story, this is the outcome of the creativity of God. How much bigger is God? Like I've said before, I think we've got all eternity to explore God, partly because it never ends. We'll never get to the end of that. We'll never get to the point where we think we've caught God. We'll always be caught in the mystery. And that is a pretty exciting way to spend eternity, I think. It means we've got all of eternity to discover and rediscover and discover and discover and discover. So we're learners for all eternity because we can't get our heads around God.
And look, quite frankly, I watched the documentary about infinity the other day, where there's a whole bunch of mathematicians and a whole bunch of scientists who basically explained what they knew, but when they finished explaining what they knew, looked at the camera and went, I don't know. And if scientists and mathematicians can look at a camera and go, I don't know about something, a concept, then I think we as theologians and people who want to understand what God is and what God's like, that we would imagine that we could sit there and go, but I know, I think is hitting ourselves just a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, I'm impressed that you could get through a show like that.
Their heads were exploding. It was completely messy. My head just went boom so many times. It was like, no, get out of here. Anyway, the 21st Sunday after Pentecost is the Sunday that's coming up this coming Sunday, funny enough. And the readings for this week come from Habbakuk chapter 1, verses 1 to 4, and then chapter 2, verses 1 to 4. Psalm 119, verses 137 to 144. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 1 to 4, and then verses 11 and 12. And Luke chapter 19, verses 1 to 10, which is the story of Zacchaeus. And I think that's where we're going to start. Am I correct?
I think that's a great idea.
Good. Do you want to kick it?
No, you can go.
All right. So this is a really well-known story, obviously. Everyone knows the story of little Zacchaeus climbing up the tree, or whatever the Sunday school song is.
Yeah.
You know, you can't go to church for too long before the kids' church kids come out and sing a song about or show up a picture that they've coloured in with some dude up a tree and Jesus saying, "Come down and have lunch." And I've always read it as a story of redemption and forgiveness and encountering Jesus and how that can transform someone's life. And it's very, very true. And I take nothing away from that. But typical me likes to dig. Typical me likes to go down. And so some interesting things about this passage when I had a look at it in the Greek. First thing is Zacchaeus' name. The name Zacchaeus literally means pure, innocent, clear, and bright. So here you have someone who has been maligned by society. Everyone hates a tax collector in the 20th century. Multiply that by 67, and you've got how everybody loved tax collectors in this first century Middle Eastern world. Not at all. Mainly because tax collectors were people who were locals, who the Romans had said, hey, you're going to be the tax collector, and hey, you'll get paid by adding a fee on top of the tax that we already collect. And often tax collectors saw this as a way that they could really bolster their wealth because they would jack it up just a little bit more. And everyone knew that. The Romans didn't care. They still got their taxes, and the tax collectors got more. And what's worse, here is someone who's supposed to be on their side doing the work of the enemy, the oppressor. So tax collectors didn't have a lot of great kudos amongst their peers and weren't seen in a very good way. Yet here, Jesus calls him by his name, and his name literally means pure and innocent. How cool is that? Just to kick it off right from the start.
Really interesting. Really interesting thinking about that. So here we got a short guy who's called pure and innocent, and we have a story that children relate to very easily. Yeah. I think there's a reason this is a Sunday school story, a Sunday school staple. And part of it is that I think little people identify with Zacchaeus. Maybe not in all his theft and abuse, but in his stature, and maybe, as you suggest, in the meaning of his name.
Yeah, which is interesting because, as you mentioned, he is not doing really nice things and not being a really nice guy, and yet Jesus still refers to him as pure and innocent. Which is very, very interesting. So Jesus, in saying his name, first of all, because we get to that part in the story where Jesus literally says, Zacchaeus, hurry down, come down, for I must stay at your house today, in verse 5, right? So right off reminds of him of his name. Pure and innocent. So here is the master, Rabbi gets up the tree to have a look, and Jesus comes over to him and says, hey, you're pure and innocent. And you can just imagine the religious leaders standing around going, what the snot? Are you kidding me? Pure and innocent? Not this guy. We don't see him like that. So then you've got this word must. I must stay at your house today. And that word must is dei, D-E-I, and which means it is necessary, or it is inevitable. So either it's something that has to be done, or it's going to happen anyway, right? almost Zacchaeus doesn't have a choice here, right? It's inevitable. I'm staying at your house today. Then the word house is interesting because it's oikos, and it refers to a physical dwelling, but it can also refer to your family lineage and household in the sense of your family grouping, right? Past and present. So hold on to that. And then he says, I'm going to stay. And the word stay is menai, which means to abide or remain, all right? Which I think, and that's an important difference. People, abiding is staying, but abiding is actually more than staying. At the moment, I'm being blessed with the hospitality of a couple who've lent me their bungalow while I transition to my new home, 200 and something kilometers away, but finishing off my job here. And I stay here, but I don't know whether Harry and Meredith would love it if I abide here. In other words, if I'm going to just stay here forever. That ain't going to happen. And
Yeah,
they're probably
right.
going to be happy to get rid of me. I love you, Harry Meredith, by the way. But they're beautiful people, just a lovely, gracious people. But, you know, I stay here. But if I started implying that I was going to abide, I think there'd be some stern words, and rightly so. Abiding has this sense of not just popping in to stay a while, but actually not just being there, but immersing yourself in the world of that. This is why Jesus said, abide in me as I abide in you. Right? That abiding is this connection thing that happens, right?
Yeah.
So this is what we've got here. So when you put all these words from the Greek together and look at what Jesus is saying, he's literally saying this. He's saying, innocent and pure, come down, hurry, for it is inevitable that from now on I will come and abide in and with your household. Now that is more powerful than I'm coming to your place for lunch. Incredibly more powerful. No wonder the gatekeepers standing around were incensed. No wonder Zacchaeus was absolutely rapt, and no wonder it completely transformed his life and heart, and he responded in the way he did. Who wouldn't respond to such acceptance, such belonging, and such love to a person who, as far as everybody else was concerned, was, you know, the black pig of the whole community? You know, don't go near this guy. So I think there is a lot in that just one sentence that can speak very strongly to us, that Jesus sees us for who we truly are, and who we really are. And that Jesus is basically saying to all of us, I know what you really are, and it's inevitable. I'm going to abide with you. And it's not just going to affect you, it's going to affect your family, people around you, your community. This is going to be an abiding that will transform everyone around you as well as you. And I think if we look at the story in that sense, not only does it seem to make more sense, but there's an incredibly more rich and powerful word from this Jesus in telling Zacchaeus who he is and what he's meant to be. And as I say, no wonder he responded the way he did. He could not do anything else. He's being loved and given this sense of belonging. It's just beautiful.
There's a pinnacle to this story that I think's worth pointing out, and that is that this one too is a son of Abraham. As soon as anyone took on the job as tax collector, they were shunned to the degree that they were described as no longer part of the Jewish world, no longer a son of Abraham. So for Jesus just to turn around and use this language is a very powerful term of welcome, and a real slight to the exclusion mechanisms that have come into place to make sure Zacchaeus is known as one who's an outsider. And then, of course, this simple statement of what the Son of Man has come to do, to seek and save that which was lost.
Yeah.
Really a bit of a call card for Jesus. I'm here to look for that which is lost. I'm not here to be a doctor for those who are well. You know, it's the same kind of language that Jesus has used in the synoptics for, in Matthew and Mark anyway, for another tax collector, Matthew or Levi. This same message, this enacted message, if you like, of I'm here for the one who is the outsider.
Yeah.
And really a profound challenge to anyone who wants to follow Jesus, of course. What does it look like for me to be drawn to the outsider like Jesus is?
What's really interesting about that statement you pointed out in verse 9, I've just noted too, today salvation has come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham, not has become.
Yeah.
It's not that it's happened in this moment.
Yes,
He is
that's
a
right.
son of Abraham. He's never
That's right.
lost his connection to
Yeah.
that tribal group.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful passage, and like I say, as we've said, it's full of sentimentality, and I think being very careful to make sure we see beyond, not past it. The sentimentality's there because it is a story that does those things, and that's fine. But let's see beyond that sentimentality and into that sentimentality, this power of not just the statement there, but also that statement you pointed out. Salvation has come, for the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost, and it's inevitable. Inevitable that Zacchaeus was going to be found.
Yeah. I love that salvation is expressed in the giving away of goods and repentance here. So it's so grounded. Yeah. It's a physical response. It's not, oh good, I'm going to heaven because Jesus somehow abides in my heart. It's actually this love and grace and salvation of God turns this guy around. It makes him live completely differently. It turns him from being one who is seen as self-seeking at the very best into one who is genuinely giving toward others, living in a very different way. And this is salvation. This is what being saved looks like for Zacchaeus. It's not this airy-fairy pie-in-the-sky spirituality that, I've now got celestial fire insurance for end times. This is much more grounded, and this is what it looks like to be saved, to be what I was created to be. So he's finding freedom from not only his past, but his present, in the sense of the idols that he is worshipping now.
And these are his idols, the possessions, the money. That's what he worships. And so he's getting, moving that on. And I love this. I'm going to pay everyone back 4 times as much, but I'm also going to give half my possessions to the poor. So this wasn't just about making restitution. This was about going beyond that restitution and beginning to live in a lifestyle that would let him take on this new persona. Rather than taking from people, he was going to be a giver, which is metanoia. That's a complete 180. That's complete repentance. That's going this direction, taking and going, hey, no, I'm going to be a giver now. Yeah. Incredibly powerful.
Have you ever asked yourself the question, I'm only just thinking of this now, do you reckon Zacchaeus stops being a tax collector?
So did he, sorry, what?
Do you reckon Zacchaeus stops being a tax collector?
We don't know.
There's nothing here about his job.
No.
There's nothing here stated about a new sort of career.
And maybe even if
I don't know.
as long as he wasn't
too hard to believe that
and continuing to give to the poor, well, why not?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, and I think that's really worth pointing out too. Jesus at no point judges or condemns him. At no point. Which is, I guess, another powerful lesson in and of itself too. Going out there pointing the finger is often not the way, but sharing love with someone. I think what's the Les Mis, that famous scene in Les Miserables with was it the chalice gets stolen?
Yes,
and the priest just lets him go. Tells the policeman to let him go, and so you loves on him, and of course that was enough to turn him around. And same here, here's Jesus coming along, and you can probably think, here comes the preacher. He's walking over to the tree. I'm about to get it. You're going to lay in the boot, and he said he gets, hey, pure and innocent. I want to abide with you. Which is beautiful.
Gee, that's interesting that you mentioned the bishop in Les Mis. I think that is the high point of the story of Les Mis. Everything comes out of this act of undeserved grace on part of the part of the bishop. I don't know. So it's one thing to watch the musical Les Mis or even the movie, I think, but to read Les Mis, and especially the author's description of that bishop is actually one of the most extraordinary things I've ever done. Because, you know, the bishop plays this small role in the musical, and indeed in the book. It's a very long book, but still his description of the lifestyle of the bishop goes on for 100 pages. So it's not, you know, you get this idea of someone whose life is very, very full, extraordinarily humble, deeply dedicated to the gospel. I've read that. I've sometimes gone back to Les Mis and just read the bit about the bishop, just read those 100 pages. Such an admirable character, fictional, obviously, to a degree, but maybe this is something that was actually witnessed as well. You know, maybe this is an amalgamation of characters the author comes across or something like that. Just a real moment for me when I read that many years ago, of wow, this is what Christianity can be. The bishop is an extraordinary character in that, and in the book does much more than just give away these candlesticks. He really is living a remarkable life already. I would highly recommend those 100 pages as a bit of a 1 or 2 night read.
Read them before Sunday.
Great.
And include them in your sermon. What's interesting, though, is that this whole idea of, you know, the change that comes across us and how that transforms our lives is Paul really speaks to that in this reading from 2 Thessalonians, where he's talking to this church, and in verse 3, he says, we give thanks for you. We give thanks to God for you because your faith is growing abundantly, and the love of every one of you for one another is increasing. So there's this, when we were talking before about what's the evidence of the Spirit, which was, I know it was from last week, but, you know, what's that evidence of God doing something in your life? We see in Zacchaeus this heart that goes, I'm going to not just pay back what I stole, I'm going to pay back fourfold with interest, and I'm also going to start giving to the poor. Here, Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy recognize that this particular church is visibly growing in their faith, and the faith growing is because they're loving each other more and more abundantly, and that's why they're boasted about. Interestingly enough, too, though, not only are they boasted about, but there's a steadfastness about them. There's a courage to stand in persecution. These things are part of that loving one another. They're buoying one another, supporting one another. So not only do we see in this church, this community of people who have been touched deeply by the Spirit, which has caused them to bolster together and to love each other, and no doubt to welcome others into their community as well. But there's evidence of that goes beyond just those things, and there's this sense of we're going to make it together, we're going to do things together, which is really interesting to me as a Benedictine monk, because within the Benedictine life and monasticism generally, I think it was one of the very early grandfathers, if you like, of religious life, monastic life, Pachomius, I think it was, who said that monks shouldn't technically live alone because they need community in order to live out their vows. monks. This is why, those early desert mothers and fathers who ran out into the desert, they didn't. I mean, so they went out there to be hermits. No, they didn't actually. They actually lived close by each other and supported each other and shared with each other, and they formed community, which is the model that Pachomius and his brother took, and they built that more, and then Evagrius Ponticus, and then you move on to Benedict when it becomes more solidified. A couple of others in there, the rule of the master and all that sort of stuff. But by the time you get to Benedict, that this has all happened. And so, but Pachomius is really, really clear. You need one another, because the evidence of what's happening internally as you pray and commit yourself to seeking God is going to be evidenced by the love that you share with others. And that's where you find it too, by the way, in that sharing with one another. So what we're seeing here spelled out in this church is another practical, example of what Zacchaeus experienced and how he reacted. And I guess gives us another clue as to what it should look like when we are made whole, when we have this awakening to God, when we repent, turn 180, metanoia, make our way back to the right path, when we experience this sudden abundant life, and this is literally what it should look like.
I found myself wondering as I read through this how needed the perspective of Paul was for these people to see growth in themselves. How hard is it to see love bubbling up again amongst us? How hard is it to see our faith growing? And I mean this. I think I mean this. I know Paul is encouraging here, but I think I'm trying to touch on something that's more than encouragement. It's actually helping them recognize that the Spirit of God is at work. It's not just saying nice things or pointing out all the good things. It's actually saying it in everything that's going on in your community. I see the Spirit of God at work here. I see growth. I think it can be very difficult for us to see our own growth.
Yeah.
And it may be that Paul puts this stuff right up front so often in his letters because it's so hard to see in ourselves. Unfortunately, it's often easy to see in others. We can sort of recognize change and improvement and all of that kind of stuff, but in and of ourselves, I think it becomes quite a challenge. I found myself wondering if there's more than just, keep going here, but actually an articulation of something these people can't yet even see. Yeah. They would pray for it and hope for it, but what if they're not even sure it's there? What if they're not even sure this love is growing among them? How important might it be for them to hear from Paul that he sees the Spirit of God making the difference the Spirit of God is supposed to make in their lives?
Yeah. There's another really interesting point that Paul makes here too in encouraging them that comes just after that. In verse 11, he says, "To this end, we always pray for you, asking that our God will make you worthy of God's call." So it's not their call, it's God's call.
Yeah.
And will fulfill that by God's power. And what will be fulfilled by God's power? Every good resolve and work of faith. It's going to be God who gets the results. It's not our willpower. It's not our strength. It's not our push. We simply do what we know to do, and God will do the rest. And that's possibly why, just off the top of my head, they didn't recognize it, because they're just going about being who they think they have to be. We're not doing anything spectacular. We're not doing anything special. We're just loving each other and sharing a sandwich and giving someone a bed and helping someone out and whatever.
Yeah, that's right. We're doing everything and we're doing nothing.
Right. But what Paul's making sure they see is, first of all, as you say, that this is actually quite unusual
Mm.
in terms of other communities, because Paul's getting around, he's seeing this stuff, which is why he's able to say that, I'm assuming. But on top of that, he's making it clear to them that you might think it's small, you might think it's not important, you might think it's under the radar, but this is God's call, and it's going to be fulfilled by God's power. You just keep doing what you're doing, and it's God's call, and God's power will do the God's thing with what you're doing. It's almost like the story of the boy with the couple of fish and a few loaves of bread, and then God took it through Jesus. God takes that and multiplies it, but it took someone who was faithful with their bit of bread and a couple of fish for that to happen. Here's a community who are faithful with just what they've got, just what they know to do. We don't think it's much. We don't think it's anything special. And yet Paul is praying for them that they will recognize that through God's call, God's strength, every good resolve and every work of faith is going to touch where it needs to touch, so that, verse 12, the name of our Lord Jesus may be glorified in you, and you glorified in him. And that's something that's going to rub some people up the wrong way when you point it out to them. This is not just about Jesus' name being glorified in you. It's about you being glorified as well in him. Meditate on that. It's well and truly worth it.
Yeah, that's worth sitting with. I wonder if you point out what towards the end of this passage, what's also at the beginning of it. This is a letter written to the church of the Thessalonians in God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. They're a community within the community. So this is very much instigated and owned and led by God, not by them. This is the reality they're surrounded with.
Yeah. Well, I'm only halfway there. Let's jump into the Hebrew text, which were from Habbakuk chapter 1 and chapter 2, the first 4 verses of each, and then Psalm 119, verse 137 to 144. I mean, this is a relatively well-known reading from Habbakuk, particularly the bit from chapter 2. How did you write it, mate? What were you seeing as you reflected on it last couple of days?
First of all, it's worth pointing out that this is a cry to God by the prophet Habbakuk, not from God. So it's not so much Habbakuk hearing God and passing on those words to another. This is a complaint by the prophet. And it's all about, where are you?
Yeah.
Where is God in all of this? With everything that's going on, where is God? Why do you make me see wrongdoing and look at trouble? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. It's a complaint. And then there's a moment of change. I will keep watch and see what he will say to me. There's this moment of waiting, and expectation, of course. There's an expectation that God will answer here, and the Lord does, of course. Write a vision, make it plain on tablets, so the runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by faith. Interesting there, isn't it? There's a deliberate, the opposites there that the author is working with are pride and faith. Not doubt and faith, not fear and faith, but pride and faith. This is a call to be confident even when we can't see what's coming. when we can't see God in action. It's this beautiful call to trust. And I the longer I go through pastoral ministry, the longer I go through living this faith myself as best I can, the more I see this everywhere. People who are saying, I'm trying to faithfully wait. I'm learning to faithfully wait. I don't have all the answers. I know what the cry of my heart is and my expectations and all of these things around my hopes for the future and what I believe and have been told and taught about how God will behave in my life if I trust him. It's just not working out exactly like I expected, but I'm resolved to wait. I'm resolved to trust. And that is a position of humility rather than pride. It's the human pride, that expectation that kind of puffs up and says, God, you should have done more by now. And I'm not saying we can't bring those complaints to God. We most certainly can. The Psalms teach us to do that. And Habbakuk is, as this prophet of Israel is actually bringing this complaint. He's baffled by where God is where are the prophecies being fulfilled? Where is, and this assurance comes back. Just wait, just be patient a little bit longer. I haven't lied. I'm not delaying. The time will come.
That word oracle that's used in verse 1, if you look at the Hebrew for that word, it literally means burden. So you can hear this nice. I like cry that. Of his heart. It's a burden, the burden that the prophet of Habbakuk saw.
Yes.
This is a weight on his shoulders. That word means a weight, a burden, a loading down. So he's actually carrying a weight for the nation. And if you look here carefully, you can see that there is this trouble within Israel. And it's around the law and the use of the law. They've let the law go. The law becomes slack. You let the law go slack and justice never prevails. That word, by the way, isn't about holding people to account. It's about justice in the sense of social justice, as looking out and being just and looking out for each other. That's where we see the word, particularly in the New Testament, righteousness and so on. That's what that word means, is justice and doing right, doing just. So doing right never prevails where we've been slack with the law. Why? Not because the law is about controlling other people, but because when we read the law, it gives us boundaries with which we can safely live. In fact, we're talking about this idea today with one of my classes, where we're watching a film as a trigger for decision making. And I'm stopping the film all the time to say, if you had to make this decision here, what would you do? And at one point, a military legal advisor advises a colonel, is advising a colonel about a military thing that she wants to do. And she seems to be pushing back when he says, look, I think we need to refer this up to the Attorney General. And she gets cranky. He says, ma'am, the law is not here. The law is here to protect you, not to stifle you. And I stopped the video at that point and said to the students, what do you think about that statement? And there was, all this discussion about rules and laws that we have in our society, in our workplace, in our schools and so on, and understanding that when laws are made well, when rules are made well, they're actually there to help us live better. They give us boundaries for safety. They allow us to thrive in their environment. Some of them are made with a lot of thought put in place. So, for instance, in many schools, studies have been done that show that, students in uniform, because they're not concerned about what they've got to wear and who's wearing what, everyone's wearing the same thing, it actually helps them study better and focus on their studies more. It's not there to stifle your creativity and cause you to not be an individual. It's actually there to help you do what you're at school to do. And that is to focus on that you are. Within the military, It's a slightly different reason. The rule on uniforms in the military is to make you understand that you are a part of a unit, that you are a part of a collective of people, and that you belong together, and that you're looking out for one another because you are one. And so here, that we need to understand that God gave Israel the law not to stifle them, not to crush them, not to oppress them, as I know Christians often like to interpret it. And Jesus never said anything about that at all. Jesus never said anything that comes close to the law is there to stifle you and hold you down.
Yeah.
Doesn't say it.
Yeah.
He actually says he's going to fulfill the law. He's going to make sure he fulfills it and follows it. Why? Because it gives us guidance and wisdom for where to go. And Habakkuk's mourning here because they've let it go. The nations let it go. And because that's happened, justice isn't happening. And when you read through the law, and you see the amount of times it refers to, how you need to support one another and treat one another. And if someone gets hurt, here's how you fix it, and so on and so on and so on. And here's how you look after the neighboring country and aliens and so on, strangers in your land. You understand, if they've let that go, why he's not seeing justice prevailing, and why wickedness is surrounding them, because they've let it go. And interestingly enough, the wickedness that's surrounding them isn't somebody else, it's themselves. And so this is a weight, and the cry is, as you pointed out, when is this going to change? We've been after, when's, crying for help. Why will you not save us? And then write the vision. What is it? Make it plain on tablets. And that statement is very similar to the instructions that God gave when God said, write the law.
Yeah.
The same word is used, that word vision. It's a similar word that God that's used in there. And write it plainly so that a runner may read it. So it's not just about writing it down, it's about getting it out there among the people.
Yes.
There's someone taking that out to them to remind them of who they are and what they're meant to be and what they're meant to be about. And the vision, there is a vision. There's a reminder. There is a vision. Doesn't lie. And if it seems to tarry, wait for it. Don't step out and try and do things your way. Don't try and solve the problem yourself. Wait. Be patient. And again, this was another topic of discussion at another meeting I was in today, where we talked about how we're lamenting really much about how in our world today, we don't know how to wait. We want instant results. We get cranky if it takes 5 seconds to refresh an app.
That's right.
So do live that way. And because the righteous, the just, will live by their faith. And what is faith? Is the just trusting, that trust. It's not blind, but it says, I'm going to wait. I'm going to trust that this is going to work itself out. I'm going to do what I know to do and just listen and look and remain steadfast and sure. This is a really powerful word. And I really felt for Habakkuk carrying this burden.
I agree. Yes, this is a heavy burden for him to carry. You can see why Psalm 119 is put alongside this, can't you? Absolutely. By the time we get to the end of it, your commandments are my delight. Your decrees are righteous forever. Give me understanding that I may live. This is anything but a depiction of laws that are inherently oppressive. Of course, any law can be abused, including the law of God. And I think by the time we get to the New Testament, we've sort of got examples of that.
Oh, look, just look over the last 2,000 years, you'll see examples of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't have to look far.
Yeah. Especially when we look at laws as a description of our rights. So we start fighting one another in order to hold on to our rights. Is it any wonder Jesus sort of says the core of the law is love? It's actually about others. Love God, love your neighbour. It's a pointing away. And even modern laws, that's where law does well. Law actually becomes quite destructive to us, I think, when we see it as a description of what I'm entitled to without a description of what I'm asked to give for others.
Yeah.
Become very destructive. Can I just, Mark, just before we finish, have a little discussion about the language used in that gospel reading around Zacchaeus's height?
Yeah.
I don't know. There are not many people I've run into who don't think of Zacchaeus as a short man. Yet the description here, so in the translation I've got in front of me, he was trying to see Jesus. So he's climbed up this tree. He's trying to see Jesus, who was, see who Jesus was. But on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. Often in translations, they'll clarify words like he by using the name, even if the translations don't do that. This is one of those examples where they've held on to the he. And there's a lot of people, there are some people who raise questions about whether it's actually Zacchaeus who is short, or is it Jesus? And the implication of that is, what if this is one of those very, very few passages that tells us something about Jesus physically? And the picture is, is Zacchaeus climbing up on the tree because he is so short he can't see over the crowd? Or is he climbing up the tree because Jesus is so short that he needs to be above the crowd in order to actually see down into the center of this crowd? So that's sort of the image that's potentially an interpretation of this story. But it really does, it really raises those questions. If the text is not clear on this, what are those assumptions that we think of Jesus as tall, that we think of him as pale-skinned, that we think of Jesus as muscular, robust, manly? I don't have objections to any of those things, but where is this default that we think God must be like a Greek god? And yet here we have this little story that at least raises the possibility that Jesus was actually less than ideal physically.
Yeah.
I think there's always something worth taking, sort of stepping back and checking ourselves on this kind of thing. Am I measuring Jesus? Am I measuring Jesus by the idealized standards of my culture or my time?
Well, here's an interesting reason why we have to be careful with that, because that can shape your complete theology.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Twitter today, a lot of stuff happened today that relates to these readings. On Twitter today, somebody was lamenting the effeminate, the effeminacy of the church, the effeminateness, whatever you want to call it, because you have a lot of men in these churches who are effeminate, and we don't have an effeminate Jesus. We had a Jesus, and someone else was saying in another thread that had completely nothing to do with that, but it sort of came up again, talking about Jesus, when Jesus was talking about, don't hurt other people and non-violence, that it's got nothing to do with protecting your household from someone who's breaking into your house. If that happens, you have permission from Jesus to shoot them. It was an American conversation. You permission to Jesus from shoot them to protect your household and your belongings and your family. This had nothing. This was something else altogether. What Jesus was saying. I'm like, what? And when you start talking about a Jesus who's jacked, who's built, who's a carpenter, I'm out there with my big, long lumberjack beard.
Jesus the cow.
You're going to get that. And yet we literally see Jesus being arrested and him not reacting, being hit and him not responding, being verbaled and him not speaking. This is not a Jesus who's reacting in the same way that these Theobrogans, sorry, I went there with it, but these Theobrogans are going on about, because they see their Jesus as a jacked guy who carries an SLR-15 or SR-15 or AK-47 or whatever you got and drives around in a ute. That's truck.
Alarmingly, this is creating God in our own image.
Yes,
and that is always very, very dangerous. And so I think there are moments with a scripture like this, and there's another. So I've actually preached on this with my congregation a couple of months ago. We did Zacchaeus, but one of the pictures I put up was a famous painting of Jesus, and it's called The Fat Jesus. So it's got a very overweight Jesus on the cross, naked and essentially fairly ugly. The number of people who commented when they saw that, not in my congregation, but when this painting was brought out, that this was offensive to their understanding of God, was quite disturbing, really.
Yeah.
What it highlighted for me was that we have these very idealized pictures that our cultures give us of maleness, femaleness, the ideal body shape, all of these kind of things, and we throw these things onto God. And we throw them especially onto Jesus, with the very, very few moments that we get a physical description of Jesus. This is probably almost as close as the Gospels get, actually, to that. But what if it's not so much, that Jesus stood out because, as a carpenter, he simply had to be muscular? I've met plenty of carpenters who are quite fit but thin, and probably anything but ideal, in our cultural assessment of physicality. I just don't think we have to go in this direction. And look, there's just a possibility here in this little text that that maybe Jesus wasn't popular because he was everything people thought men should be. Maybe he didn't have the physicality of a Roman soldier, and that's entirely okay. Maybe he was built in ways that weren't all average or above average. And I just think it's a wonderful little question that this text kind of throws at us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, lots to chew on this week. Yeah, can I come back to the Psalm just for a second, though?
Sure, please. I did skip over.
No, that's okay. We can jump all around the place here, and it kind of fits with what you were saying anyway. That last couple of lines of the Psalm that you pointed out, but your commandments are my delight, your decrees are righteous favor, give me understanding that I may live. As you said that, it sort of jumped in my head. When we read, give me understanding that I may live, I think we often hear in our heads, give me the answer. But I'm not convinced that that's what that means. This is not about getting the answer. This is about having understanding. Yes. It's about having understanding so that we can live. How often does not having the understanding, not knowing, cause us to become so overwhelmed, so fixated on having to know that we forget to live? Because our focus is just totally on that thing. And I honestly think here what I'm seeing is that living with the mystery and not knowing is okay. What we should be seeking is understanding. And it relates to what you were saying. because, again, Jesus had to be this. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Because you want to be certain? That's not a reason.
Because we build God in our own image. We do this all the time. And,
of course we do.
And Jesus coming into the world is the biggest challenge to that image.
Absolutely.
We all thought of a God that was, if God came into the world, God would come to smite us. What if God came into the world not to cause us to suffer, but to suffer himself, to suffer, for God to suffer?
Yeah.
What if God didn't come to condemn, but to forgive? What if God didn't come in hatred and anger and revenge, but in love? These all challenge the pictures we build of God in our own image.
Absolutely.
They actually flip them. They flip them.
And what we need to be praying for is not, we want to know, but just give us understanding as we abide, as we tarry, as we wait. The answer will come in its time, the appointed time. Yeah.
Like it.
The 21st Sunday after Pentecost, we had Habbakuk chapter 1, verses 1 to 4, and then chapter 2, verses 1 to 4, Psalm 119, verses 137 to 144, 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 1 to 4, and then 11 and 12, and then Luke 19, verses 1 to 10. Tell us how you saw these things. Tell us what you thought about what we said. Tell us what you say or said, or send us a link to your sermon once you get it up. We'd love to grow as we converse about this with you. Comment on Mark's blog at barefootfollower.life. Comment below if you're on YouTube. Jump over to Monkin Docs at Instagram and Facebook and leave comments on posts there. DM at those comments, or send us an email at between2sundays, that's the number 2, at gmail.com. And tell us what you're thinking. Tell us what you think. Tell us if you want us to stop. We're not gonna. We enjoy this too much, even if it's just for ourselves. So, but anyway, we'd love to hear where your head's at and grow with you as we follow this lectionary through. And we're nearly to the end of the liturgical year. Very soon it'll be Christ the King Sunday, which
my goodness,
we'll have an interesting conversation about because it's problematic in and of itself, the way we've worded that. And then we kick off into year A, and Advent, and that means Christmas is coming. So
well,
I don't go to the shops much, but I saw some decorations when I picked up a couple of things this morning, so it must be on the way.
All happening.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us on Between Two Sundays. Mark, thanks, buddy. It's always fun.
Thank you. Great to talk. Plenty for me to chew over.
Absolutely. And until next week, we'll pray God's grace, love, and peace be with you. See you then. Bye now.
See ya.